I'm Jeffery Liss, one of the vice presidents of the National Space Society, and one of the originators of the whole idea of the NSS town meeting, which, for better or for worse, is a chance for the membership to come up here and to listen to what the elected leadership has done or not done, and to ask them what they have or have not done or will not do in the future. I'd like to introduce some of the people we have up here today. Starting on the left, we have Charles Miller, a former director of National Space Society, well known for his efforts in pro-space, an organization with which we do a lot of cooperation. Next to him is Robert Zubrin, who happens to be senior vice president of this organization, former chair of the executive committee, and a man of many scientific and organizational talents. In the middle, in the hot seat, is Kerby Ikin from Australia, a member of our board and recently elected chair of our executive committee. Kerby is now essentially the heart, soul, and backbone of the organization. The man charged with leading us, as they say, onward, upward, etc. And then on the right is Pat Dasch, who is the executive director of the organization. Pat is the one who essentially is supposed to listen to all the hot air that comes out of us and then actually make things happen. And I think we'll start by just turning the microphone over to Kerby for some introductory thoughts and comments. Thanks.
Thanks, Jeffrey. Really, the town meeting, as he said, is the opportunity for you to interact. But just to give a quick overview of some of the significant things that have been happening lately, I guess the most important one that some of you would be familiar with, you may have heard throughout the conference that we spent roughly 2.5 days at the lead up to this conference doing strategic planning. It's the first time the board has done that for, I think it's 3 or 4 years. We started the process, I think it was in '94, and at that stage we did some very high level thinking, what the vision of the National Space Society was, what the mission of the National Space Society was. And that, believe it or not, actually took about 2 or 3 days to really distill the core issues of what we believed the National Space Society needed to achieve to create a space-faring civilization. Having done that, what we've been doing over the last few days was looking at the next level of strategic planning, which is coming up with the action plans, what some of the issues are that we need to address, getting all structural, NSS, internal structural issues dealt with, focusing on what things we need to address to achieve our vision. Now, this is a very long process, so it's not something that you'll see immediate change overnight. But essentially what we've done is we've asked ourselves a lot of the necessary questions, both internally and externally, about what we need to do. And we will be going, I should say we have a professional facilitator doing this, somebody who works with non-profit organisations as their day job. And we will be putting in place over the next few weeks and probably a couple of months a list of actions that we have to do. In fact, according to our facilitator, as horrified as we on the board were, probably up to 700 to 1,000 tasks, action items that we will need to address and prioritise. Now obviously we can't do 1,000 tasks, so we'll choose the most important to us and we will then put in place action plans to address that. We'll implement them, we'll evaluate them, we'll go back to the beginning again and keep rethinking what we need to do. So it will be an iterative process, but we will, as of this next few months forwards, have an actual plan of what we need to do both internally and externally for the organisation. So that's really the biggest thing in terms of the direction setting of this organisation. We have probably tended to just keep doing many of the things that we've done in the past. And yet the world around us has changed dramatically in the last 10 years. If you think back 10 years ago, it was still sort of the end of the Cold War, but certainly pre the fall of the Berlin Wall. So the world around us is a vastly different place now. The importance of governmental funding is less important now than it was previously. Throughout the conference you will have heard reusable launch vehicle companies, entrepreneurs, people like Jim Benson talking about what they can do in space. And quite clearly, we need to be influencing a vast array of issues just beyond governmental space programs or particular programs of that nature. We need to be working in the medical field, the sociological field, the legal field, finance raising around the world. Space is now a global commercial business. You heard Bob speaking in his presentations about the Mars Society, that the concept of raising hundreds or $100 million to try to privately finance a space venture to Mars, well, that's the kind of thing where we can draw on global resources to do that kind of thing. So the point is, the world is different now. NSS has to and is rethinking what its directions are, what the issues are that we have to confront. I believe it's a very, very important step that we have taken over these last few days, and I hope that you'll be able to see that change the direction setting. Probably in 12 months, it won't happen overnight, but that's the critical thing in my mind. Perhaps I'd hand it over to Jeffery again.
On the question of external matters, I've been asked to announce, with those of you who have not heard of it, immediately after this meeting, there's going to be a small meeting here hosted by another Vice President, Greg Rucker, and Bruce McKenzie, another member of the board, asking the $7 billion question. If you were just elected king of NSS and you were given a huge donation, how would you like to see it spent? And I think that's a very valid question. I hope a lot of you will stick around to see if we can come up with some very creative ideas on what we can and can't push for. Now I'd like to turn the microphone over to our Executive Director, Dasch.
$7 million, big money. What would you spend it on? What's your dream?
To Pat Dasch, our Executive Director, for a little bit of update on what things are in the works down at headquarters and around the world with NSS. Pat, thank you.
Well, as you probably know, this is a very active year in the space business. The only place we're not active, it seems, is getting that space station up there. This is terribly frustrating, and it's leading us to spend a lot of time talking to people in Washington at the moment. Just a few notes on things we've been doing really recently. I sent a letter to the administration just a couple of weeks ago saying, get with it, get this space station program sorted out. We can't just keep money throwing at it. Congress are getting ready to just put more money in. The administration says it has to come out of other programs at NASA, which immediately tells us space science is going to get hurt. We hear threats. I don't know what Bob's heard. We're hearing that the in-situ propellant experiment may get dropped from the Mars 2001 mission. We reckon if Al Gore can spend time thinking up the Triana satellite, which NASA is now rushing to put up in record time and spend $50 million they don't have, and if Bill Clinton can go down to Houston and watch John Glenn training, he ought to have time to come out and say something about how we're going to get space station moving along. So we've been concentrating on that somewhat. For the first time ever, we were a co-host of the Washington Space Business Roundtable lunch last week, which put us in a more visible position in the business community, and that means I sit down and talk with people from as broad a range of interests as the National Academy of Sciences and people from Standard & Poor's, and that's my interest. The investment community are coming to these watering hole events for the space community, and we want to be talking to them, encouraging them, facilitating things. Which leads me to one of the things we're going to be doing this summer. You know that the Commercial Space Act is currently in process. We hope it's going to get through Congress before they all get totally caught up in the election. They are, in the hope that everything goes through on the Commercial Space Act, looking at the next 2 steps of enabling legislation. And after talking to people on the Hill, we are looking at holding a roundtable discussion later this summer we'll have invited guests around the table to help define not only the boundaries of enabling legislation, in this instance I'm talking mainly about tax legislation, but how people see they could benefit from future legislation to accelerate the pace of space commercialization. So that will be an opportunity for us to make a direct contribution to information gathering for future legislation. I've also been asked to consider putting together a meeting. There are a number of groups around the country. Some people coming out of Sandia Labs are behind some of this, and Bind as part of it as well, who want to look very seriously at this, maybe establishing a consortium to do a commercial lunar base. There's a lot of feeling out in the community that we're just not going to wait around for NASA to get to it, because NASA probably won't even be in that business pretty soon. They will just be doing what they like to see as the cutting edge technology development, and then it's like, over to you. Everyone, you get on with it. If you've got the money, you go do it. So we'd like to be aligned with the people who are going to try to seize that opportunity. On downstream, something for you to all think about is the fact that NSS goes into its 25th anniversary celebrations next year. And we want to use this to leverage our position in the community, to increase our visibility, to remind people that we've been around and we're still here waiting to see things happen, and that we mean to see progress made in getting humans into space. We also have an election year. If you've looked at your Ad Astra, you know that from the one short article in there that we're starting to provide you with information about the piece in this issue is about members of Congress who live in districts which have significant NASA business, but who have voted against space projects. We want you to take that information clearly and go talk to your local staffers if you live in any of those regions, and tell them that this doesn't really wash very well with you and you'd like to see greater support for space. As we go on towards the election, we'll be working with the chapter's coordinators to find what information can best serve you as we try to influence our local communities to at least stop and think about space. We know space is not a big issue politically, but we can make it an issue from the grassroots up. People listen, staffers listen when their constituents go in. And if you go in with a clear space message that you want to see space station happen, that you want to see space station happen so that we can get our thinking moving beyond space station, because we are logjammed right now by this mega project, they will listen to you and we can make a difference. So we really want to work with you on that. I think I've probably said enough about what we're doing. I have a list this long of things that we're hoping to do, trying to do. It is a very exciting time just because we are in such a changing transitional period. We're also working to internationalize our organization more, and to that end we'll have several representatives, including Kerby and Buzz, down at the International Astronautical Federation meeting in Australia. And we're working towards a presence at Unispace 3, the third United Nations meeting, third ever, I should say, third ever United Nations conference on space, which will be in Vienna next year. We want to be there. We want to be part of this whole international scenario to make a difference and have our voice heard. And I think I know we're being heard more in Washington. How do I know? When I wrote my letter to the president, I got a call at home at 7 o'clock in the evening. It was delivered to say, hey, why didn't you come in and talk to us about this? We don't like this criticism. I said, fine, I'll come right in. We've got, for those of you who are involved with producing our position paper on Space Station, we got feedback, we got critique, item by item, back from NASA headquarters within 2 weeks of our putting that position paper out, and that opened up a dialogue for us. So we are being more effective, and partly we're being more effective by being more professional in our approaches, and it's paying off. So we hope, again, that we can make this whole groundswell of feeling really make a difference in the future. Thank you.
I'll now offer the mic to another person who needs no introduction, our Senior Vice President, Bob Zubrin.
I'll make this really short. I think the NSS needs to mobilize to get humans to Mars.
I'd actually like to open this up, and because some of you got a chance to hear me yesterday talking about ProSpace and the March storm, and those who came on Friday got to hear my views on the rapidly growing expansion in commercial, revolution in commercial space, and how that's going to drive, the revolution in cheap access to space, and have to lead the breakout. And many of you who were here, I hope you were all here, got to hear Bob Zubrin about going to Mars. I think there's two parallel revolutions, complementary revolutions going on. We are going to go to Mars, and we are going to settle the planet, and we're going to break out off this planet and open the frontier to all the people. What I'm interested in knowing is, why are you here at this conference? And what are you interested in, and what might get you involved, actively involved as a participant, instead of sitting in a chair and coming to the conference? And how are you going to participate in this breakout of the human species and all life into the solar system? What grabs you? Those of you who want to get involved in an NSS activity and take some leadership and not wait for someone else to do it for you. One of the things that's going on is the government isn't going to do it for this. We are the people, and we have the responsibility for making this happen. What are you interested in? What questions do you have?
My name is Murray Clark. I'm president of Clear Lake Area Chapter of the NSS. Many years ago, I was a member of the L5 Society, and somehow I lost my subscription or something. It just sort of disappeared. I didn't know what happened to it. And then, about 6 years ago, I saw a magazine. It was called Ad Astra, in a grocery store magazine rack. I took that thing and said, wow, this is really great. That's the kind of organization I need to join. And then I discovered it was the L5 Society, and the LSI stuck together, and they've been there all along. I didn't know about the NSS 6 years ago. And when I'm recruiting new members in lobbies of theaters right now today, as I did with the last science fiction movie that came out, I'd say that 98% of the people I talk to never heard of the National Space Society. I think that we need to get Ad Astras out on shelves in grocery stores, bookstores, or whatever. And I want to make a personal commitment to do that by getting extra copies of Ad Astra that I'm going to personally distribute to these places, so people can stumble on this society and join up. And so I was wondering, if I have any success doing that, could we maybe do something for the chapters on a national basis to make some extra copies available so we can do that.
We sure know how to pass a hot potato off.
Yeah, watch the guys punt that one. Murray and I have talked about this idea over the weekend, and I've agreed to work with him. We're going to try this experiment in Houston. Many of you probably know we have looked at actually putting the magazine out on at newsagents, selling it to the general public twice. We actually tried it once. My take on the first attempt is that the whole marketing strategy was wrong and it was doomed to fail before it started. Last time we looked at it, we recognized that we had to put too much money at risk up front, and we weren't in a financial position to do it. We're still in that same position. You do have to have money to put up front. probably for 3 years worth of magazine publishing before you start to see a return if you actually go out on the shelves to sell it. So I think Murray's experiment, where the local chapter will buy magazines from us at as approximately cost, and if I see any way to give him a bit of a break on them, I will. And they're going to take them to grocery stores, to theatres, to places they can identify locally. And we will track, so we'll have metrics of how many he buys and how many members it brings us, and how many inquiries he gets and how much recognition he can develop for the society. And given that he's down in Space City in Houston, and given that we're taking a conference there next year, I think this is a great idea, a great initiative, and I hope it builds our name and name recognition prior to our going in with a tremendous conference. And thanks for coming through with the idea.
I would like to add that this is a classic example of what NSS needs and the way NSS works. Your board is not the repository of all wisdom. In fact, it's not the repository of any particular amount of wisdom. It's the stuff that comes up from the people in the field who see an opportunity and say, we've never done this before, it has a lot of promise, let's try it. And one of the key roles of your board and your headquarters staff is to be there when you come up with an idea that is well conceived, that you can present it to us and show it to us how you plan on working at it, and what you want to try is that we can give you the support we can so that you can go out, and then if it works, other chapters can pick up the idea and march with that, and you can hear their ideas with what they're doing. Carol, you identify yourself, please.
I'm Carol Johnson from NSS, North Texas, and I really liked Bob Zubrin's Mars calendar. And I see this as something maybe that NSS National could do something with. I'd like to see them do a calendar similar but better than the Millennium calendar that was on sale today at the conference, with months and so forth that and system that Bob Zubrin established. Maybe not with a Roman numeral year, but all the rest of it I liked really, really well. And if we could get some space artists to contribute some good artwork, Mars-related artwork, I think this might be something that the society could sell and use that as another revenue source. Plus spread the calendar around so that it comes to general acceptance, because I really like the calendar.
Well, I'm for it. It would take production work, and it would take marketing work. Certainly, you want to do one thing that they did do that I thought was very good was it isn't just a calendar. They incorporated a lot about Mars. In other words, as the calendar goes along, there's a message developed about the human exploration and settlement of Mars. It's a possibility. I mean, we have to see if the production effort could be mobilized for it, and if it was something that we felt we could market successfully. I mean, I certainly would have no objection to it.
Question? Yes. Stand up, please. Identify yourself.
Sean Starr, member at large, I guess. Understanding that campaign promises often have life expectancies shorter than the campaigns themselves. And there are long lead times involved in presidential campaigns. What thoughts or plannings are going into possible representation for the presidential plank committees for the two parties, for the 2000, for Mars Direct, getting commitments toward Mars Direct, cheap access to space, the whole range of things?
Right now within NSS, there are some draft resolutions being circulated for the fall congressional elections. I do not know of anybody gearing up yet, at least within NSS, on the presidential election on specific campaign platforms. Everything seems so much in flux. Charles, at your end of the organization, do you see any particular efforts being done looking at the 2000 election?
Any chance of getting George Bush Jr. to the Houston conference?
We are going to talk to Marianne Dyson about that at great length.
We've already discussed it.
ProSpace as a, gosh, how do you say this, a developing project we call Frontier 2000, in which we intend to, and I'm sure Bob has some of the same thing, and NSS could contribute some resources, in which we intend to brief and affect the people who are speaking as candidates for the 2000 election, and how they can take the frontier message. And it may not be a space message. Bob's going to try to get a candidate to commit to, let's go to Mars, and that's great. We are interested in particular about getting the message of the American people have this great yearning. There's just an opportunity here at the turn of the millennium about who are we as a country, who are we as a people. We've had 200 years of rapid development. We've made a huge contribution to the world. We are a shining beacon of hope, of freedom, of security that's going across the world. The Cold War is over. Everybody wants the American way of life. But where is America going? I mean, we've been there, done that. Now what? And I think there is an opportunity, particularly at the turn of the millennium, to start a new discussion, a new conversation with the American people. And it's going to be the candidates. There's actually going to be questions from the American people saying, what's your vision? It's enough of this short-term plan stuff. This is now time as a country to talk about our future and where we're going. And we're going to try to plant some seeds about as what they can answer. Now, if a candidate gets down and, we're going to talk rockets and that type of stuff, I think they're going to fail. But I think Bob talks about it a good bit. It's about human, expanding a higher level form, taking it to the next level of human society and new opportunity, new freedom, and that we are a frontier country, and talking about the frontier and how the greatness of America developed, and new freedoms, and how space could be that place. I think it'll come out of it naturally. That all of these things will come out of that naturally, and I think the National Space Society and other groups, the Mars Society, ProSpace, can contribute to that. We can get, by giving relevant, speech language, laying out the possibilities to these candidates and get them talking about it and all benefit. I think that's something we're planning on doing.
One of the things that was implicit in what Charles said is you work with the candidates to help give them valuable information that they can use and incorporate. I would just pass on something from our local experience to keep in mind is you should consider very carefully before you consider what we call ambush advocacy. Be very careful about surprising a candidate in a public forum, asking him to support a major space program. It is easier to say no in public when you don't have the money than to try to justify that and say yes on short notice, and then you have them put on the record the wrong way. There's a question over there.
My name's Terry Kokh, and we have an existing nature sanctuary in southern Indiana. We're building a space education center there. I would love to see NSS have a permanent booth in the space. We're also building a simulated Mars colony to test cells equipment. This will be starting in about 2 years, and I'd love to see NSS have a very strong presence there. As something like that can be worked out where NSS actually has a booth that's permanently there, viewed by, right now we're getting about 10,000 people a year coming through, and simulated Mars colony we estimate around 50,000 people.
Thank you, Terry. I have read your stuff, and in fact, the information has been circulating among NSS advocates.
I heard a rather interesting idea that may have come out on the the format that we've run it in, and someone had suggested having Washington D.C. Every year so that we could do political canvassing similar to the Art Storm at a second time during the year. And I thought that a combination of that idea, I mentioned this to a couple people, with the current system would work very well, where we had it in Washington, D.C. every election or even number year. And then during the odd number of years, we would still rotate it around the country. So it is in fact sort of have the best of both worlds and have at least every other year the ability for a large number of people to do Washington canvassing without having to make a special trip to Washington to do it. I think you get a lot of participation from that, perhaps a substantial percentage of the convention attendees would be willing to do it. So has any more thought gone into the format of the ISDC and similar issues?
That's an easy question, because the answer is absolutely lots, and lots. The idea is so obvious on its face that we keep talking about it year after year after year. The problems that we have arranged in doing it are a couple. Number one, the costs in Washington are, if you excuse the expression, astronomical. As a matter of fact, they're more astronomical than our space program. I tried very hard this year to try to get a proposal from Washington hotels, which we could use as a consider for our 2001 ISDC. And working with the Convention Bureau and the hotels directly, we could not get any kind of contract proposal that came anywhere near what we or our members could afford, either in terms of dollar amounts or in terms of contract provisions. In addition, we tend to hold our conferences on Memorial Day weekend for two reasons. One, because costs tend to be much lower, and two, because our members very much appreciate and need the extra travel day so they don't have to take off an extra business day from work in order to get home. And the question of Memorial Day or not Memorial Day has been put before the chapter's assembly repeatedly, and each time it's been put there, the chapter assembly has been very strongly in favor of keeping it on Memorial Day. So the other problem was, even if we could meet in Washington on an economical basis, Congress, in its infinite wisdom, is basically leaving town. They're not particularly receptive to having a lot of visits at that time. In addition, we've talked about, well, even then, it's still headquarters in the nation's capital, and maybe we ought to go there periodically, and we keep trying to do that, go back every 2, 3, more regularly, but we run into that obstacle of being able to do it on a cost-effective basis. The other thing is our friends in California and the Southwest also appreciate us in the East coming out and visiting them occasionally, which I can't understand why, but that's their view. Does that answer your question?
Yeah, I think that bring that up to the Chairman's Assembly. I think that if people thought about the issue, that I think a lot of people would agree that it's not necessary to have it on Memorial Day if you're going to Washington. Obviously, you'd have it during a period when Congress was in session and the canvassing would be useful. So it completely changes the equation, in other words.
I agree with you, John. I think if NSS makes the decision that you want to be a major influence on the leaders of this nation, that moving, or not necessarily moving, but having a conference in D.C. and having hundreds of NSS members come to D.C., get in the training, and then going up on the Hill with organized, effective training, effective materials, a very powerful message, can make a big difference. Now, I think all the details can be handled. The question I have is, you're all conference attendees. If this was Washington, D.C. here right now, how many of you would stay a day or two extra, say till Tuesday, or we did the training on Sunday and on a full day Monday? How many of you here would do that? About 30%, 40%? Good.
But it's a biased audience.
Right, but that's a sample. Your ISD attendees are a biased audience.
That's fine, we'll take it.
I can tell you there's an issue. How many of you are already participating in the March Storm? 4 or 5. Yeah, you would significantly add on to people going to help.
Let's take a closer look at it again. Question? Nancy?
Stu Stewart, I happen to live about a gallon's worth of gas away from the Washington Monument. I'm probably the newest member, and of course it was science and space that got me into it. Bob's book didn't hurt at all either. My experience in organizations at the board level and at the state and national level is that nothing makes a goddamn bit of difference but money and presence on the Hill. Whether it's the Fraternal Order of Police, where I hold a state role, or the National Education Association, where I hold a local role. And it doesn't make any difference who you are or what your goal is. If you don't lock arms and go kick indoors on the Hill, not gently and present a good message, then you're going to get absolutely nowhere. And no matter what we say, and I know I'm an outsider looking in, no matter what we say, we're not going to generate the support we need. It doesn't make any difference, from my view, what we say here about who's going to participate in getting us into space. Right now, it is going to be the United States government that's going to fund the next couple of years of space. I just don't think business is going to I don't think business is going to control profit. And right now, if we're not working in DC, and I can't be articulate, but I clean up pretty well, I can stand behind you in a suit, I can do those sorts of things. And that's what we need to concentrate on, is not only informing the public, but I hate to say publicly damn, but if we don't, it doesn't make any difference what the public says unless they're writing their congressman and we're the focal point in Washington. I've already said more than I thought I'd say.
Well, I'd like to correct one misconception of yours. If you cared enough to join, to come here and to speak, you are an insider. You are one of us.
Let me add something else. I'm here because the lady who runs science in my school division paid for the flight and the hotel. I'm paying for the conference. They all thought it was $700. And my principal bought me a sub. I'll never make Houston that way, but there's other ways to stay involved. I'd prefer to be more active. I just can't afford it.
You gave your time. You pay attention to the space issues. You talk them up in your local community. You are one of us. We all do what we can. There are very few of us who can have their businesses send us around the world to do all these things. You are one of us. I'd like to ask Pat Dasch to explain a little bit about what we do in Washington on lobbying and legislation.
Well, I've lived in Washington for 10 years, and I still only know a couple of handfuls of lobbyists. Lobbyists aren't particularly visible. You don't see lobbyists on the nightly news a whole lot, or if you do, you don't recognize them as such, and you wouldn't recognize them again. We spend quite a lot of time and an increasing amount of effort working the political machinery. We have submitted testimony and been invited to submit testimony for every significant space hearing so far this year. And when we have done so, it has been noted into the record. A lot of written testimony just gets picked up and carried along. It has actually been announced in the hearings that NSS is submitting testimony, which is being included in the record. We work very closely with numerous offices on the Hill and are in a relationship with several of them where they call us when they want input from people they recognize are looking beyond where we stand right now. And that is quite gratifying. But we don't wait for the calls. We go talk to them a great deal. And we have a very free, open line to several key people's offices on the Hill and are reaching more and more as they recognize that we have a very significant contribution to give them in this very changing environment where no one on the Hill is quite sure where this is all going. So we are very active on the Hill. We do have meetings with the administration. And let me tell you one other thing you do when you're in Washington. You play the media. If I can take you back to that event that happened in January, the outcry over future humans to Mars research being cut off in Houston. We had several members of the media call us to say, what's this about? Is there any story here? And we told them there was one hell of a story here. because even though it was low cost in NASA terms, low level work, if they discontinued those contracts and cut those people off, and of course I immediately got on the phones and found out that while the civil servants hadn't been reassigned at that point, that was the plan. They were going to be reassigned out of Mars work. Contracts would be cut off to give them any support. So we told the media that if you cut this off now, you're doing just what you did with the shuttle program, you're doing just what you did with Space Station. When we're in a position to think about sending humans to Mars, or when you, NASA, finally get around to thinking about sending humans to Mars, you won't have any of the background. You'll have lost the expertise you have, such as it is right now. You'll have cut everything off and you'll be starting from ground zero, and that's disastrous if the population is talking about ultimately, yes, of course, we will send people to Mars. And I personally did 17 media interviews in a day and a half. I know Buzz did some, I know Charlie did some. We by telling the media there was a story there, we had an influence, and as you probably know, we also got to Dave Weldon's office, which got Dave Weldon to ask the question of Golden, which got him to turn that around. So we work in Washington, and I think we're effective. I'm ready to do more anytime we can.
Pat, please, I meant to cast no stone at all.
No, I wanted to share with you what we do, and a lot of it is not visible. Quite honestly, we're doing so much, we can't share it all in Ad Astra.
Now, I want to cast a stone number. But actually, this time, not at headquarters, although, as some people know, I occasionally have thrown a stone at headquarters. In one case, a big one. No, not to this headquarters. I'm going to throw the stone at you. You don't have to wait till March storm to talk to your congressman. You don't have to blow $1,000 to travel to Washington to talk to a congressman. You can talk to your congressman in your own district. You can go by yourself. You can go as a chapter group. You can go as a couple of fragmentary chapter groups. All these different methods have advantages. If this guy is visited by 6 or 7 individuals over 2 months, all telling him, what are you doing to get a Humans to Mars program going? I mean, eventually, these characters and their aides are constantly telling us, nobody ever tells us that they care about space. When you're telling them about that to their face. Well, if people in the districts, think about it, we got 20,000 members. If we can get 1,000 of them to actually do something, okay? So 1,000 by 50 is what, 20? That's 20 people, okay, in every state. It's at least a couple of people in every congressional district to actually go and visit their congressman, and it doesn't take it's an extra gallon of gas to drive over to the 2 neighboring districts. Okay, so you don't have to just visit your own congressman, you can visit the 2 neighboring ones. Okay, it's something you can schedule when it is convenient to you. It isn't a question of whether you're free on March 10th when March storm is. You can figure out when you can do it and go do it. They're in the district, with reasonable frequency. Call them up, arrange to go down there and do it. This needs to be an activity that chapters do. Okay, every chapter needs to take the responsibility of educating its congressman, and preferentially go to the neighboring couple of congressmen, okay, and do that. If you were to do that, if we were to be doing that on a national basis, on a continual basis, we would change completely the political complexion in Washington, much more so than can ever be done with 1 or 2 March storms per year. That's, as a chapters assembly, I call upon chapters to do that.
Charles?
I want to build up on what Bob said. That's absolutely, I think it would be a core function of a chapter. That as I came out of the chapters. I started L5 chapters in the 80s. And we were constantly struggling with what are we doing to make a difference? And we had some speakers, and pretty soon you get tired of that. Well, is that getting us into space? And I'll tell you right now, I think a local briefing, having that relationship with your member is the absolutely wonderful thing to do. You can push a Human to Mars program, you got choices, or you can push a citizen space agenda, which is cheap access to space and commercial space legislation and solar powered space. You have choices. ProSpace has the materials developed now. These are the packets we delivered to over 250 congressional offices. They're work perfectly out in your hometown, talking to your members of Congress there. And there are lots of opportunities for citizen activists to make a big difference. And I'll cast a stone with Bob. It's not more of a stone, it's an invitation to get involved and make a difference. And it's a request. I mean, I call on you to be great. Do great things. The revolution is happening now. And you have an opportunity to be part of that instead of watching it happen. You know, jump in.
I'd like to echo what Charles and Bob said and point out a couple of very pragmatic things for you. A number of years ago, I was making a telephone call to a senator on the alert, and the staffer said, "Wow, are we getting a lot of calls on this issue?" Gosh, I wondered, what? No, it's the U.S. Senator's office. Well, what do you mean a lot of calls? I said, and they said, well, we're getting maybe 25 to 30 calls on this issue. And all of a sudden I said back, what does it take for National Space Society to generate 25 or 30 calls to each senator? That should be something that NSS and its chapters can manage. What that did for me was it gave me a certain amount of hope that we didn't have to be AARP with 2 million people, that we could do something at our level could actually make an impact on their radar screens. And that's given me a lot of hope over the years, and I'd like to pass that on to you. The other thing is, I used to be a member of the Chicago chapter of National Space Society, and I discovered that we had a lot of congressmen in the Chicago areas, and I lived in the suburbs. And I knew the congressman out where I lived, but he knew I was interested in space, but it really didn't make much difference. So what we did is we formed a new chapter in the Illinois North Shore NSS. And then we made official calls to his office. And let me tell you, it made a big difference. We know he won't vote for certain things, and we know why he won't vote for it. And we respect him because he's thought them out and he's consistent across the board. But what he does do is he won't give us the big thing, but he'll give us what he considers small things, like legislation improving the chances for commercialization, sort of budget neutrals. So we now have a space supporter who knows when he sees us what we're there for, and then he's conscious of it when he votes for space. Very useful tool. Who didn't ask a question before? Oh, Greg.
Just want to point out that very few members,
introduce yourself, please.
Bryce Walden, Oregon L5 chapter, very few members belong to chapters. You might have 1,000 people in the chapters in a 20,000 member organization. So the chapters are working hard on it. Our chapter goes and talks to the senator's aides and has a whole several hours presentation, that sort of thing. But to think that the chapters are the only members of NSS to do this sort of thing would be a mistake. We need to reach out to the actual individual members somehow and get them involved in the process.
You're right. You're right.
Bryce, I appreciate that comment because that's something we've started trying to work better at this year. Those of you who saw our commercial space mailing, many of you sent back the letters being included. We now have this new fancy database which allows us to select much more information, so we were able to send you letters pre-addressed to your representatives, your congressmen, and many of you signed them, sent them back, and then we delivered those at times of greatest impact. We realized we must mobilize our individual members to do letters, to send messages. As Jeffrey said, the public is horribly apathetic about politics. 20 calls to a congressman's office really shakes them off. It doesn't take a lot to get our message across. So 20 individuals are quite as good as 20 chapter members. We need you all to mobilize, and every single person can make a difference. And we will try to structure our campaigns to be more inclusive of the individuals.
Can I see a show of hands? How many people here are not members of chapters? Let me advance a concept for your consideration. Again, this is the way my Illinois North Shore chapter started. All it takes to be a chapter is 3 people and a name. And what you do is you basically find, wherever you live, find 2 other people who have any interest in space, call yourself a chapter, and once every 2-3 months, just meet for a Saturday afternoon in someone's home, talk about space, talk about what's going on in Ad Astra, remind yourself that you're not alone out there. Your local newspaper would even be able to print a notice that you're having a meeting that's open to the public. What you've done is you create a presence in your community. The name with the word space is out there. Something comes up in space, something they remember to call you. You want to call a media person, you say you're not John Smith, you're John Smith of the local Space Society. That gives you a credibility. And therefore, you can have a great impact at very, very little effort. And frankly, it's no big deal to spend a Saturday afternoon for a couple hours with a few of your friends. You do it all the time. So you might consider that as a technique. Greg, I think you were next.
Yes, in consideration of the...
Well, you identify yourself?
Yes, I'm Greg Allison. I'm president of Huntsville, Alabama, L5 Society, and former palm tree coordinator. We'll have the society have a palm tree again.
Are you re-volunteering?
He's following up my plate at the moment. But anyway, we could probably find a volunteer. I'd be happy to help look for volunteers.
Is there a volunteer in this room? Just, well, a moment. What do you think about it?
Anyway, let me pose something to the guys at the table and the audience here. In consideration of the coming millennium, which also is a year of a presidential campaign, why don't we consider, I know it'd be logistically tougher, but perhaps worthwhile, why don't we consider a campaign to take March storm equivalents to the various presidential campaign offices for each candidate. Visit the candidate's office, get in with his co-workers, the people that promote his particular campaign, and try to get an audience with him and address these things.
Charles?
I think I already talked about that. ProSpace is going to do that. I think the Mars Society is going to do that, and I would encourage NSS to start a project doing that. It's going to take an NSS leader to say this is going to happen and make it happen, and that's possibilities for you.
Not a question, actually, if I can beg Pat's indulgence to make an introduction here. Rich Johnson with Cotton Expressions and Printed Apparel. Some of you may have received some information from me earlier this week before ISDC. Coming to my first ISDC here, I've heard a lot of talk about reaching out to new people, the questions of raising money for the chapters and for national to do more productive efforts or more long-reaching efforts. And I'm very happy and very honored to be part of a new program for NSS and for the chapters to give people a new tool. And that's very simply put, while people are apathetic about politics sometimes, they do like what they wear. Cotton Expressions, shortly, I won't turn this into a paid plug.
That's right, we'll bill you for it.
Thank you.
We also raise money up here.
Yes. No. We've been doing science and science humor and engineering themed t-shirts for 16 years because we think it's a good idea. We're not just in it for the money, but we want to educate people. We want to turn people on the idea that this is fun, this is cool, this is necessary. And to reward your chapter members, to give people that you see at meetings, on the street, at theaters, something that they can take away and tell a story about themselves, which is what they want to talk about. They want to talk about them. They want to say, cool shirt, where the hell did you get that at? And they're going to point to the NSS logo and say, I got it from Stuart, I got it from John, I got it from Jeff, I got it from the people at NSS, and this is what they're about. And I look forward to talking with everybody I sent out a packet to. There's 90 of you, there's one of me, so please bear with me. But I really believe that this is an important initiative, and we're doing it not only because it's good business, but because it's good for NSS because it's good for us as a race to promote space awareness however we can. And I think they're great. Very quickly, it's not the right size for you. Let me know, Bob.
I looked at it and said, that's cool, I want one.
Okay.
Thank
If it's
you.
not the right size for you, Bob, well, tough. No.
I'd like to ask a question here, just for our information. We've been hearing a lot about politicking in this country and stuff like that. I'd like to know if I could put somebody on the spot about politics in other countries. We have in the audience a former chair of our ISDC in Toronto who's familiar with some things in Canada. And I'd like if I could call Swift to stand up and ask, what kind of mood do you see among the populace in Canada? Are they even aware that space exists as an issue, or what kind of opportunities are there for activism there?
I'm Paul Swift, now down from Calgary, actually. I don't know exactly answer your question, but I can address one of the things about accessing your representatives, and that is in Calgary, and I'm not quite sure if it works here, but in each local district, of course, there's a member of Parliament's office, walk-in street office, and they walk in and talk to them. I haven't yet done so. My dad used to do it all the time, but it was quite interesting to find out that you could actually make an appointment with the person themselves, the person who would be sitting in your case, Congress. And you can speak to their secretary, and it may be a week or two before you can even speak to the actual person. But these people are open and they're eager, and like you're saying, they don't really know what this issue is all about. They have enough other issues on their plate of import that this sometimes gets excluded. And sometimes the people that they do talk to in terms of anything technical to do, certainly with space, are people with a vested interest, the engineers, the owners of the big companies. Okay? They don't get to speak to, I would have to classify myself as a lay person interested in space. And the weight that your message has in their office is considerable.
Thank you.
I was just going to quickly add on that subject, there are obviously different governmental systems in different countries, so NSS has to consider how it can best operate in different environments. In Australia, we have a parliamentary system. Influencing an individual politician doesn't have the same effect because all decisions are done on party lines. So unless the senior members of the party who decide the policies can be influenced, it's much more difficult to change a party's position. But one of the interesting things that you can also do is influence government policy at the bureaucratic level. If you are knowledgeable and you have an understanding of issues, as Jeffrey was mentioning, often there are subtle things that you can do to make a difference. And I'd just like to cite a specific example, which I dare say probably nobody in this room would be aware of unless they heard my talk the other day. But Australia will be the first country in the world to have legislation that governs launches and re-entries for reusable launch vehicles. Now, the reason that that comes about, and the fact that it's put in place in such a way as it will be conducive to reusable launch vehicles and not just expendables, is that organisations like the National Space Society and the people involved within it have an opportunity to provide informed comment to bureaucrats, often the people who make a lot of the lower level decisions to actually put the policy into place. So, in fact, Kistler Aerospace, which I expect will be the first commercial reusable launch vehicle in the world, will actually fly from Australia in the fourth quarter of this year. Now, I'm not suggesting a competitiveness here, but the simple fact that any individual who is knowledgeable in the world, even outside of the kind of conventional political realms that we operate in, can still actually play a part in opening the space frontier. So I just I urge you to keep a broad mind also in how you might think about it, as does NSS when it operates in an international environment.
And for any of those of you red-blooded Americans who don't want to stop all these American technology having to go to Australia to fly, you can get involved in helping pass the Commercial Space Act, so we can get some reentry authority.
Absolutely. Question?
Sean Starr at large again. Pat was talking about testifying before Congressmen. Do you still testify as to the results of the survey? And does that resonate at all with the committees there, or is it more or less a token to us that we're here and we do represent constituencies?
As you're probably aware, the response from our latest survey is being tallied right now. In fact, we're indebted to Chris Pankratz' daughter, doing the work for us voluntarily, tallying it. So as soon as we have updated information, yes, we do use it when we testify. We also mount a significant campaign to make all the staffers in relevant offices and NASA and basically anyone we can touch aware of where our membership stands. The survey results are a really powerful tool for us, and we're actually curious to see how the results fall out this year, and we'll share it with you in the magazine, and we use it to the max. And it's very effective. It tells them with no quibble, this is how the space-interested public feels on this issue.
I would have to object, though, that the survey as it's been formulated this year and in previous years is extremely biased by the sentiment of the person who writes the questions. So, for example, if you look at it, what you'll see is the question is, should we establish a permanent human presence on the moon, or should we study going to Mars? I don't think the questions are presented in an even-handed way. So I really think that does need to be changed for our surveys to accurately reflect the membership and the public.
Point noted. We will take a look at the survey again next year. I would also ask you, when you see the survey, look very carefully, and hopefully Congress won't look too carefully. It's really interesting because if you put the questions together, we have a really sort of a bifurcated membership. A large number of people are in it because NSS is the best vehicle by which they can receive information about space. On the other hand, a large number of people are in it because we want to make things happen. And one of our jobs as leadership of this organization is to convert those who are in there for the, almost called the voyeurism, to become activists. But we're not all in this organization fully up there yet with our commitment. So we have to work at that, and your own chapters, with your new members you recruit, you have to convert them from interest to wanting to do it and make a contribution. First question?
Claire Stevens, Oklahoma Space Alliance. I wanted to know what kind of response you got in the survey. How many or what percentage?
They're still coming in, so I can't tell you. As yet, we haven't quantified at all. We've taken a sampling from the first 3 weeks to get our volunteers started, but we don't have final counts on that at all.
Previous years?
Jeffrey is asking me, do I know prior years, and this is where I haven't caught up with history. I can't quote you those numbers offhand, but we will run a comparison with the last couple of years, and we'll put that in the magazine when we print results.
Thank you.
Cliff McMurray, Clark Summit, Pennsylvania, living in exile.
On Earth.
Yes, exile on Earth. A couple of years ago, I started pitching an idea for fundraising for NSS to various people, and have been pitching it more actively in the last couple of years, which I won't bother to go into here again. But what I would like to bring up is the fact that of the several board members that I have communicated with in writing about this, I've got 0 response back, either orally or by phone or in writing. And Charles asked what might get us up off the bleachers and more active and more enthusiastic. Not being communicated with about a fundraising idea, I don't think is a very good way to generate that enthusiasm. I'm a big boy, my ego can take it. But somebody else whose ego is a bit more fragile may not respond very well if they don't get communicated
Or
with.
who's newer.
This is probably the first question I get to respond to in an independent sense. You might recall when I made the comment about strategic planning at the beginning, one of the issues that the NSS and the NSS board has had to come to terms with is that the board is actually a corporate board, so it needs, and the individuals within it need to recognise that professional governance role that they have. One of the issues that we've been trying to address over the last few months, and again which will be continued in the strategic planning process, is management structure, command lines, communications. I'm a chapter member as much as the chairman of the executive committee, and to me it has not always been clear, if I had a question or I had a suggestion or whatever, exactly where to send it to. Sending it to the board in general is not necessarily the right thing to do, but that may be the first thing that you would do. So what should happen in that case? First of all, I would like to think that in due course, if you have a fundraising suggestion, we will have made it clear through the various means of communications at ASTRA, etc., that we have a VP for fundraising. So the VP for fundraising would be the person that you would take it to. If you don't, for whatever reason, feel that you have the ability to contact them directly, then your chapter coordinator or your chapter president or your chapter coordinator would be one way to feed that up the command chain. It's certainly totally unacceptable if a director doesn't respond to you or doesn't deal with your query. That's just simply not acceptable, and it won't be accepted by the board in the future. Directors will be expected to be in connection with the membership and to act on people's queries. That doesn't necessarily mean that the specific director will be the one that answers it. He may come back to you and say, I've passed it on to the VP for fundraising. Other than that, though, we are trying to clarify those chains of command, the lines of communication, and ultimately a suggestion like that on fundraising should go to the fundraising VP. That will then be discussed within the fundraising committee, and you should always get an answer.
Well, I'm in the process of getting an answer now. The only thing I would say is that in the past it really hasn't been very clear when one has a proposal to pitch who it needs to go to.
Precisely my point, that we need to clean up not just clean up the lines of communication, but communicate the lines of communication to people.
This question? Bryce?
Yeah, Bryce Walden, Oregon L5. First of all, I want to agree with Bob Zubrin that a lot of the surveys I've seen out of NSS are what people in the field would call lousy surveys. They're not a good survey. If you want the answer predetermined, send out a survey like we've been sending out.
Oh, like Planetary Society.
Yeah. Another aspect that I'm aware of is that we're always concerned about raising money. And we're also concerned about what is it that our donors want out of services of NSS, that sort of thing. What is it they're interested in? So we think it would be a good idea if you put out a survey and multiply each person's results by their contribution and send it back in.
Timeline principle.
With a nominal one for...
Give them a bozo buck to start with, so even someone that gets it.
Actually, we did send out not too long ago a survey to 500 new members. Basically, a very fairly detailed, both multiple choice and open-ended, about what new members wanted from this organization. And we actually got a 29% response from them. And we are using, the results were published in one of the issues of Inside NSS last year. And we're actually trying to factor that into our thinking. We also thought about doing that. We didn't have enough guts. Questions? Yes, Paul.
Paul Swift. Jeffrey, I understand that there was some discussion that went around that in the coming years, maybe 2 or 3 years down the line, that the way that conferences, the ISDC that is, will be structured and configured is going to undergo some changes. Can you comment on that?
Yes, but most of those changes I think you will find are internal in the sense that we are now committing more effort at the national level, both from national volunteers and headquarters staff to make it easier on the local groups to run it. We are trying to essentially do a number of things. We are trying to add more manpower. We are trying to make the end result appear more professional to people, and we are trying to, as usual, expand into new directions with what we do in the conference. As always, an awful lot will depend upon the vision, the leadership, the drive of the person who is conference chair. These conferences have been, I think, a wonderful experience for those who attend. We come back, we're energized, we come back with information, all the latest things that are going on, we come back with hope. And it's the job of the organization to run these conferences so that we can give everybody more of that. Carol?
Carol Johnson, NSS of North Texas. I also heard that there was consideration, at least, of eliminating the conferences after the next 2. And I want to state unequivocally that I think that would be a major mistake. And that I really think it's important to have this gathering every year, and I want to say that I really support it. And just on a different subject, have you heard what the attendance was this year?
No. All we know was it was more than Orlando, but we don't know.
460.
460?
Good.
Okay. Your comments were, actually, the question was raised in our conferences committee. It was discussed, and your views were overwhelmingly the sentiment of everybody who discussed it. And so long as we have people who are willing to run conferences, we plan to have them. We have time for maybe 1 or 2 more questions. What has been asked before? You.
Ben, this is Mr. Space Frontier Society. I apologize if this was addressed before, but the company that I work with, one of the main things we're into, and I think you see it everywhere else, is co-branding, and that is combining your stuff with someone else's stuff when it's advertised. One thing that is done fairly well and is just finished up is something that combines what L5 and Zubrin are combined, and that's the TV show Babylon 5, and that you have an O'Neill colony and a Mars colony both in the same show. If a Zima beer can get onto Babylon 5, I think NSS should be able to get into the spin-off show, at least as a mention in Crusade. And I think, and I know that we've acknowledged some of the existence of B5 by the addition of Bruce to the governing board, but I think there should be much more stronger tie.
Well, I can tell you one thing we did in a slightly related area. If you were watching carefully on the Drew Carey show, you will notice that on his work carol there was this banner that says, "I'm pro-space and I vote." We managed to place that there. I also understand that this is the final season of
B5, there's going to be a spin-off show.
And I would imagine that we will be having discussions with our newest member of our Board of Governors, Bruce Boxleitner, to see what we might be able to do to help add a little creativity and practicality to that program. You know, like National Space Society in the 3rd millennium or something. One more question, if there is one. Yes.
I'm Bruce McKenzie, Boston L5, I said L5, Boston NSS. That goes way back.
Bruce is a senior member of our organization.
Yeah, and I also happen to be on the board of directors. Anyway, I'd like to invite you to continue this discussion. We have an email list called NSS Discuss, and if you sign up for Space View, you can put a comment next to it. We'll send you, we'll join the discussion list as well. Please do not use this for specific questions that you know should go to a certain person. Like if you know it should go to a certain VP or a PAC or someone, send it to those people or send it to headquarters, either via email or phone or letter. But if you want to have a discussion about vague ideas that you want to work out, you can use the email list year-round.
Okay, thank you. No.
And the email address for NSS headquarters, if you don't know it, is nshq@nss.org, and we're not going to be printing here until we get more mail.
Even a congressman should be able to remember that. I have two final announcements. One, there's a phone message here for Richard Poss. If he's in the room, will you please come up? And secondly, again, right after this session, Bruce and Greg Rucker, our Vice President of Fundraising, will be here to help kick around the question, if we had lots of money, we could spend it any way we wanted. What really is the best way that we could do that? And I thank you all again very much for coming and giving us the benefit of the things that are concerning you. And we are always available, and as Kerby said, we will try to make sure that you get a response to whatever you ask. Thanks again, and thanks to all of you.
At this time, I'd like to, since there's a little bit of an audience anyway, declare the conference officially over. Unofficially, as long as there's people here to get into interesting mischief, it's still on. So, I don't know the numbers. Mark Kane knows that. We divided responsibilities, and I'm responsible for the quality, he's responsible for the quantity. And what I believe the conference has made is in the black, and while the numbers weren't as good as we hoped, there was a critical mass of people here, and a lot of interesting things happened, and a lot of people seem to be happy with it. So stay in touch and keep supporting ISDC and keep supporting the National Space Society, and we'll see you all in Houston.